Ari Lewis Show.
Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. Thank you for joining us. At any time, you can email the show at arilewishow@hotmail.com, or you can email the station at Israel Sports and News Radio at gmail.com. We have a real fun segment today. We're going to talk about an interesting film I've recently discovered, even though it's been around 3 years. I'll get to that in a bit. But on the line right now, Chicago sports journalist, writer, and movie star, Mr. Brian Hedger. Brian, how you doing out there?
I'm doing pretty good, Ari. I don't know about movie star. I think I have about 50 pounds to lose before I do that.
Well, you did a great job in the film Catching Hell. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But you were part of covering the Blackhawks. Obviously, they win the championship 3 times in 6 years. And I understand there's been a big trade that's occurred in the last 24 hours. You've spoken to the GM of the Hawks as well as the player involved. Tell our audience in Israel a bit about what happened.
Well, you know what? Honestly, it was something that we didn't foresee coming. Everyone thought that there was, some players that would be moved this past weekend. Patrick Sharp, Brian Bickle, maybe Chris Versteeg, some of the bigger names in the team. The guy that we didn't expect to be moved was Brandon Saad, who's only a 22-year-old, up-and-coming, potential young star, breakout kind of a player, but he was going to be a restricted free agent this offseason. Going to demand a gigantic pay raise, and this is a team that is really pressed up against the salary cap in the NHL. And so general manager Stan Bowman, he basically pulled the ripcord a little bit and decided, you know what, instead of losing this guy potentially to another team and then only getting draft picks as compensation, I'm going to make a trade. And so they traded Brandon Saad for a package of players yesterday, the top 2 of which are probably going to be on the team, Russian center Artem Anisimov and a young prospect who's, I believe he was raised in Slovakia. His name is Marko Dano. So a great name for me to be able to write my stories. But 2 guys who are really talented. And, the Hawks, I wrote in one of my stories today that this is how the Hawks stay competitive. This is how they stay at the top of the NHL, and this is how they keep winning Stanley Cups because they stay ahead of the curve.
Again, their success speaks for itself 3 times in 6 years, and you were on the ice. And, Brian, I just want to say I grew up in Phoenix. The only playoff games I got to see were first-round games. Coyotes never made it around the first round while I was there, and it wasn't a lot of fun. But you got to see a Stanley Cup game and not just see it, go on the ice when the cup was there. Where does that rank in your all-time happiest moments in your life?
It was right up there as far as my sports career. I've seen that. I've actually covered them through all 3 of the Stanley Cup championships that they won in the past 6 seasons. But they won the other 2 on the road. And in my job, some people are full travel. I don't always travel with them. I do them also. I do all the home games for NHL.com. So when they clinched on the road, I didn't get a chance to actually be there and see it. And this time, not only to be there and see it live and, like you said, go on the ice, talk to them afterward, that was real special. But just the fact that it was in Chicago when it happened, and you just had thousands of people from the Blackhawks, still in the stands, waiting around, cheering them, and just like an hour after the game ended, people just didn't want to leave. It was pretty special. I've done a lot of cool things in my career that I will always remember, but that's going to be ranked right up near the top.
And the Blackhawks, before this recent win of Stanley Cups, not exactly the most successful team, with all due respect, right? So the fans, I think, appreciate recently the success they've had.
Absolutely. It's been the last 7 years, if you were to tell a Blackhawks fan 10 years ago that this 7-year period was going to happen, they would have laughed in your face. This was a team that was one of the worst in the NHL as far as attendance, as far as, ranking near the bottom of the standings. And it was quite a long period where they went through that. And when I first moved over here to the Chicago area to cover Chicago sports, I had somebody one time tell me, this was back in 2001, I had somebody tell me one time that if the Blackhawks ever got really, really good again, that everybody would be surprised about the reaction around town because it would be almost as big as the Bears mania. That everyone loves the Bears here. And I thought they were crazy, but they were referring to back when they were really good in the 60s. Well, that's what's happened, is that they're one of the elite teams, maybe if you want to say dynasty or whatever in the NHL. And, it's crazy around here. People you see Blackhawks stuff everywhere from where I live in Northwest Indiana all the way up to Wisconsin.
And again, they make this trade that will help them probably be the favorites going in. And you think last year they lose Game 7 on the road to L.A. If they win, they're probably the favorites going against the Rangers, so that could have been another Stanley Cup. So they have had a tremendous amount of success. Again, if you're just joining us, this is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. And my guest is Brian Hedger, who is a reporter for Chicago Sports. Now let's talk about the film, Catching Hell 2012. And for those who don't know, Israel only has 2 cable stations, Hot and Yes. Hot has done many evil things in their time. One of the most was getting rid of ESPN 2 years ago. So I'm behind in all my ESPN films. But I recently came across this 30 for 30 on YouTube. Thank God for YouTube. Catching Hell, Steve Bartman story. And Steve Bartman, this is going to be kind of weird to say, but the Steve Bartman moment was kind of like JFK assassination. Everyone knows where they were when it happened. I personally was in my car driving, listening to the game on the radio. I said, I've got to go home, watch this game as the Cubs are about to go to the World Series. And I hear the play, foul ball down the left field line, and in unison, 50,000 fans made a noise I've never heard before or since. Is indescribable. Where were you when the Bartman incident happened?
I was actually in the alternate press box because Wrigley doesn't have the biggest press box in the world since it's an old stadium. And I was out there with hundreds of other journalists and watching it. And actually, that was they had that set up. What they do is they commandeered part of the upper deck seating area and basically put tables in for the media to be able to sit there and do their jobs. And so it's behind the plate. And I remember I was actually, if I wasn't completely done with my column that night for the newspaper I was working for, I was very close to being done, and what I had already written basically was, Cubs are going to go to the World Series. This is, very surreal. And, that play happens. Like you said, that noise happens, and it's like, what is going on? And before you know it, you really start piecing things together. And it's like, for me as a journalist and as a columnist, especially at the time, I was like, man, I got to get down there. I got to go. And so I closed my computer and I rushed. I just started heading right down the ramp and out to the outfield to go out there. And that's kind of where, my story sort of begins, is just being out there. And once I got out to his seating section, it was just craziness, I felt, I kind of felt like I got out there and I started feeling like liquid, and I kind of thought that was rain. I'm like, why is it raining? And I looked up, and it was beer and pop, and people were throwing things at this poor guy, hot dogs, pizza slices. Whatever you could imagine that is sold at a ballpark was pretty much being hurled in our direction, and it was just a really surreal moment.
And the film Catching Hell talks to some of the security officials, and they talked about the danger they felt Bartman was in. That's why they moved him out. You were there. If security doesn't do that, this is going to sound kind of weird, but does Bartman actually get killed by that angry mob?
I don't know if he would have gotten killed, but he would have definitely been confronted, and it may have escalated into something physical, and it probably would have been ugly. At the time, I was interested when I first saw the documentary. When the finished product came out, it took them like about a year to put that documentary together. They had a lot of information, and they had told me when I did the interview that we talked to a security guard who said that they snuck him out and this and that, and that part of the documentary was most interesting to me because that night we were actually told by security personnel who were at Wrigley that night, who were basically forming a human wall around him at his seat. We were told by one of them as reporters that they were going to bring him out through that exit that you see him actually leave. they herded us through there into the concourse about 10 or 15 minutes before he left. And they said, hey, we're going to bring him out, out here, and then you guys can talk to him out here. We don't want to do it at his seat. And so we're like, oh, okay, we'll go out there. And that's exactly not what happened. What they ended up doing was bringing him through, as you see in the documentary. I call it a perp walk. They kind of perp walked him out, with his jacket over his head, right through us, and then boom, he's right past us. We don't get to talk to him, and that was literally the last time I ever saw Steve Bartman in person. And it was really a surreal moment. But I remember at the time there were already rumors like, hey, they put him in a disguise and they got him out of here. And we're like, oh, come on, that's kind of crazy, isn't it? Isn't that crazy? That wouldn't happen. Well, it turns out that's exactly what happened, and I thought that was the most interesting part of the documentary for me personally, was that it confirmed exactly what we had heard that night.
So when you're being told the reporters will get a chance to interview him, in hindsight, was that a lie to kind of throw people off so they could sneak him through, or did they just change their plans at the last second?
That's a good question. I thought about that a lot. And, I go back and forth. Sometimes I'm convinced that it was complete subterfuge, that they were just trying to throw us off, and there was no way in heck they were going to let them, talk to us. But then other times I start thinking, well, maybe that was the original plan, to actually let us talk to this guy, and then it just kind of spiraled, and they once they figured out how big of a deal this really was, then it was like, no way, this is happening. So I don't really know the answer to that question, but it happened, and only the Cubs know that one.
Again, we're speaking with Brian Hedger here on the Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports News Radio, focusing on the film Catching Hell, 2012. You can find it on YouTube if you don't have ESPN, like I found out. Great film. Now, one of the things I found very, very interesting was the fact that they say Bartman was offered all this money to do all these interviews. And I'm thinking, if I was in that situation, my life's been threatened, I can use a credit card, I can't go anywhere, I would have taken the money. I know it's just speculation on your part, but why do you think Bartman didn't? We're in such a celebrity culture, everybody wants attention. Why would he turn down all this money to write a book or do an interview or whatever?
Well, I think it's because truly he's a fan at heart, and I know some people in Chicago who know him, and I know some people who work with him, and he's got a pretty good job, so it's not like he's hard up for money as well. I think it comes down to the fact that he's more of a fan than anything. I mean, that's why he has not talked publicly about this incident since the one statement that he issued after that happened. And we're talking, what's it been, almost 14 years now? I mean, I can't believe that, by the way. That time has gone by that quickly. Yeah. It really does. And but you know what? He has not said boo about this publicly since then. And I think that the reason is he's a fan. And I think it crushed him as well that the Cubs did not make the World Series. Yeah, who knows whether he feels at fault at all for that. I personally hope he doesn't, because there were so many other things that happened that night that, afterward, that could have been taken care of on the field by the actual players that would have gotten them to the World Series had they not melted down about this. But, I think that's what it is. I just think that he's truly a Chicago Cubs diehard fan at heart. And he knew that, come on, you take money, you just look really bad if you take the money for that, and people just know that you're not a fan at that point. So I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah, I guess that's where me and him differ. I mean, I've never been that much of a fan of a team the way he has. He clearly was broken. You talk about the release statement where he said the bottom of this broken Cubs fan's heart, and he thought he did have an effect to some degree, but you're talking about the players' actions. You have Alex Gonzalez make the error where that was a double play ball. He makes that, they're out of the inning. They're up 3-1 going into the ninth. That would have sealed the deal. And it's brought up by Andy Kane of why wasn't that play focused on much, much more, the Alex Gonzalez error, who is the best defensive shortstop that year in the majors?
I think it was because it got lost in the moment. I really do. Like, if that had happened, let's just say that the the incident with Steve Bartman and Moises Alou never happened, right? But then the Marlins start rallying, and then they start piling on runs, and then the Alex Gonzalez play happens. I think Alex Gonzalez is definitely wearing the goat horns at that point, so to speak. But because of the crowd reaction to the incident that happened down the left field line, I think that's what it shifted all the focus on that poor guy. And it didn't help that, Moises Alou's initial reaction was pointing, right at Steve Bartman. He interfered. He's the guy. I would have had that. And then also, in my opinion, Mark Pryor, the pitcher at the time, this was a guy who never seemed to let anything get to him. He had just the most calm demeanor you could imagine on the mound. He starts flipping out. When he started flipping out and started pointing down the left field line, that's when things really, in my opinion, started to go haywire. And then everything just kind of meshed together at that point. It just kind of all melted down at the same time. And then as people are yelling and blaming Steve Bartman, the Alex Gonzalez play happens, and I think people just didn't really realize. I think they just kind of thought, well, of course that happens, Of course this is happening because that guy, like I said, I think it was more, if that incident never happened, then Alex Gonzalez is definitely, having the finger pointed at him more than it is now. And so that's unfortunate for Steve Bartman, but I guess it's fortunate for Alex Gonzalez because everyone forgets that play.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, he might have turned in possibly to a Bill Buckner type, and we'll get to Bill Buckner in a bit because he's actually in the film as well. The part where they focus on, this is kind of weird, but Bertie Mac singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," which, after Harry Carey passed away, they would have celebrities do, and he called the Cubs the champs, and that's brought up in the film to try to say, hey, that was the bad omen. That's, at the time, if you're there at the stadium and he says the champs, did you think, hey, what are you doing? We got to finish this game? Or did people kind of forget about that and then looking at hindsight, they say, oh, there we go. That was a trigger that set up this part of this whole Billy Goat curse type of thing.
Oh, it definitely caught your attention. As soon as he said, let's cheer it for the champs, I mean, you immediately stop. If you're a writer, I mean, at least for me, I immediately stopped writing and I looked at the guy next to me and I was like, did he just say what I think he said? And they go, yeah, he absolutely said what you think he said. And the fun thing about that whole thing is that, he obviously, I have no doubt in my mind that he wanted the Cubs to win. But that guy was an avowed White Sox fan. And here in Chicago, there's a huge rift between White Sox and Cubs fans. It's a big rivalry. And so there were immediately Cubs that thought, like, he only said that to jinx us. He only said that to put the curse on the Cubs. And as it turned out, then, of course, after that, boom, look what happened. The whole thing melts down. I mean, it couldn't have worked out any better for conspiracy theorists to think the Cubs are a cursed franchise.
Yes, indeed. And one of the hilarious things in the film and one of the craziest things I've ever heard in sports was they get the Bartman ball, and they spent $100,000 for it. They execute it, and they actually take it out to dinner. They put like a plate of food and wine and give him a hotel room and execute him like he's a prisoner. Although prisoners don't get a hotel room. But the point is, have you ever heard anything like that in sports, that they executed the Bartman ball? Has anything like that ever come across in your career?
No, and I'll tell you what, in my opinion, there's only two places on this earth where that might happen, okay? And one is Chicago, and the other is Boston. Now, it probably wouldn't happen in Boston because they had a long drought. Everyone thought that they were cursed too. Boston, the Red Sox have since won the World Series, 2-3 times since that's happened? So it wouldn't happen there anymore. But at the time, neither one of those franchises had won the World Series in decades, right? And, both fan bases felt like they were cursed. So to me, and especially Chicago, we're the Midwest, we're kind of seen here in the United States as more of the homespun, kind of fun, laid back a little bit, people, in our country who do hokey things like, taking a ball that you're going to blame for the, losing the World Series bid that you wanted to have and blowing it up, I mean, at the time, I want to say, I think I remember also, like Grant Porter, who owns Harry Carey's Steakhouse, or runs it. He's the guy who actually came up with that idea and pulled it off. I want to say I wanted to say that there was some talk around town, if I remember correctly, of not only just blowing the ball up, but not like there was. I think there was a vote. Like I think there was some kind of a poll that was taken. Like, should we blow it up? Should we do this? And I think one of the options was shoot it into space as well. Like, just some crazy stuff, that was going on back then. But it should surprise nobody that whole thing that you just mentioned there happened in the city of Chicago, because we do crazy things like that around here.
And, going back to Bartman, they also touched upon the film. They have a very quick interview with the governor of Illinois that says if this guy, meaning Bartman, is ever convicted of a crime, he'll never get a pardon out of this governor. And one of my friends said, do you think Bartman may have changed his identity because if people, once they find out where he works or whatever. Now, I know in the movie they track him down, you don't see him, but the reporter talks about him. How exactly has he kept his defenses up of not having any violence against him? What's your theory on it?
Well, actually, I have more than just a theory on that. I mean, he has not changed his identity or anything like that. He just goes about his life and lives his life the way that he would normally. And I know that because I have a friend of mine who's a radio reporter in town, and she's been around for years. And her husband actually worked with Steve, where at the company, which I won't say on the air, but at the company that he works for in town in Chicago. And she told me flat out that, when you get hired at that place, if you, basically if you are going to work on the same floor, you're basically not allowed to mention this whole thing to him.
Wow.
He's kind of a high-ranking guy there. Yeah, listen, I think the last thing he wants to do is talk about this. But you have to give the guy credit. He could have easily moved to another city, to another country, wherever, and said, hey, I'm just getting out of here. He has stayed in the city of Chicago, kept his identity, and he just lives life. And I think people, for the most part, probably leave him alone. I'm sure he has to deal with some reverb from this from time to time. But I hope for his sake that it's not that bad.
Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. We're speaking with Brian Hedger of Chicago. Really quick, because we're in Israel, I don't know if this is 100% true, but I understand that Steve Bartman is Jewish, and that people put some type of Jewish conspiracy out there. I remember in 2003 at the time, I heard something like that, kind of laughed at it. Did you ever hear anything that there were some anti-Jewish people that said, oh, this is some Jewish plot, conspiracy, Zionist thing, whatever?
I did not hear that one. I heard a lot of stuff, but I did not hear that one out there. I did hear one that was kind of funny, but I almost 100%. I mean, this is why I would like to talk to Steve Bartman, just to ask him if some of these things are true. This one, my buddy actually told me this one, and my buddy's in journalism as well, so he's got connections. But anyway, that night, like the next day, around here, we had television news helicopters circling his house. I mean, it was crazy. It was almost like a hostage situation inside the poor guy's house. And so the rumor that went around here was that, didn't want to go. They obviously didn't want to leave the house, so they ordered pizza or something. And somebody delivers it to the back door, and they're all happy that the pizza guy agrees to deliver the pizza. And when they open it up, written in pepperoni is "F-U." Basically.
Wow.
So, but I don't think that's true. I mean,
okay.
I think that's probably, I'm guessing that's probably a wives' tale, just something funny to say. But it is kind of fun. I mean, it would be kind of humorous for people on the outside, probably not so much for them. But, I mean, that's the kind of stuff I'd like to ask, Steve Bartman someday, is say, hey, did that really happen? Or anything like that. And I don't think we're ever going to get that chance. I think he's done talking about it, and we're the ones that are left to kind of remember that incident.
Yes, indeed, and partly because Chicago has not won the World Series since they haven't even been in the World Series since 1945. I mean, Billy Goat curse doesn't even let them get to the series. The Sox got to the series for 2004. And bringing up the Red Sox, the film actually starts out with them and kind of ends with them with the whole Bill Buckner play in '86 against the Mets. And they show at the end of the film Bill Buckner going back to Fenway. He gets a 4-minute standing ovation, very touching. I still get goosebumps even talking about it right now. Bartman is not a public image guy, but let's say hypothetically the Cubs win the World Series and they invite him. Would he accept, or would they not even invite him? I just want to know the parallels between Bartman and Buckner on that front.
That's a good question. I think that's one for the Cubs probably, but if they were to win the World Series, I bet you there would be some kind of public outcry or call for the Cubs to invite him to this and this and that. But if you do that, you're again, I guess in essence, aren't you kind of ascribing blame for him? Like he needs to be, you know what I'm saying? So, and I'm sure that he would probably look at it the same way. And I highly doubt that he would want to partake in something like that if he hasn't even talked about it since then. And my gut tells me that he probably wouldn't want to take part in something like that. But who knows, man? I mean, you're talking about the Cubs winning the World Series. At that point, all bets are off.
Yes, indeed. And he saw after the Red Sox won, there were signs that said, "We forgive Bill Buckner." And Buckner was quoted as saying, "Forgive me. It's not like I murdered anybody, but hey, that's the way people viewed it." And they probably would forgive Steve Bartman if anyone out there still upset with him in Chicago. The Cubs win the World Series, they kind of would forget about everything. But it's a fascinating story. Again, the movie is Catching Hell, 30 for 30 ESPN. If you don't have ESPN, find it on YouTube. Great, great film. One of the stars, the movie star, journalist, reporter, Brian Hedger, joining us here on Ari Lewis Show on Israel Sports News Radio. Thanks so much for your time, and congratulations on covering the trade. I know you've been very busy. Everyone can check out your work on NHL.com. And again, thanks for being on the show today.